Welcome to Debate. So you're scrolling through Amazon on a holiday weekend, right? And you see it. It's this sleek, high-end robot vacuum,
Oh, I know exactly where this is going.
right? The original price tag says $599, but there's a bright red slash through that number. And right next to it, the Memorial Day flash sale price, $349.
Which is just, it's catnip for buyers.
Exactly. Your brain practically forces you to view that as a massive victory. Behavioral economists actually call this anchoring. We latch onto that initial high number, and suddenly, the lower price feels like a steal, regardless of what's actually sitting in the box.
Yeah, it's an incredibly powerful cognitive shortcut. Retailers know that human beings struggle to evaluate absolute value, so they just exploit our reliance on comparative value to, move product.
But that psychological quirk raises a pretty crucial question for anyone looking to upgrade their smart home right now. What happens when that $349 product actually contains technology that, just a couple of years ago, genuinely cost $600 or $700 to manufacture?
Which is exactly what we're digging into today.
Yeah. Today, we're examining the aggressively marketed Memorial Day sales run by major robot vacuum brands. We're talking Roomba, Roborock, Eufy, all of them. The central issue raised by the source material is whether these massive discounts, which are often touted as like up to 40% off, represent genuine generational opportunities for consumers.
Or conversely, if they're merely calculated retail theater, just designed to offload underperforming inventory.
Exactly. And I'll be arguing that the structural shifts in manufacturing and tech have made these sales genuine. Like, these are unprecedented value drops for advanced features.
And I'll argue that these advertised savings are largely a mirage. They're masking highly elastic pricing, hitting total ownership costs, and spec sheet omissions that frankly trap consumers into buying fundamentally flawed machines.
Okay, so I want to start by looking at the objective technological shifts we're seeing in the market right now, because my position is that this Memorial Day window is offering authentic opportunities.
Authentic opportunities. Okay, go on.
I mean it. The baseline cost of high-end robotics has just plummeted. We're seeing specific, generational leaps in value that you really can't just write off as marketing spin. Just look at LiDAR navigation, for example.
Right, the laser mapping.
Yes, just a short time ago, a LiDAR-equipped robot started around the $400 mark at absolute minimum. This Memorial Day, those exact same capabilities are landing in the $180 to $250 range.
Wow, down to 180.
Yeah. And the 2-in-1 combo units, the ones that handle both vacuuming and mopping, those have dropped from that standard $500 to $600 tier down to under $300. So for buyers wanting these specific features, the math objectively works in their favor. The technology is just cheaper to produce now, and these sales are the delivery mechanism for that drop.
Well, I understand why those numbers look compelling on a spreadsheet, but the entire premise of the deal, as presented to the consumer, is fundamentally flawed.
How so?
Because those advertised savings are pure retail theater. It's built entirely on a foundation of highly elastic pricing. Brands in this space are notoriously bad for setting artificially high MSRPs, manufacturers' suggested retail prices.
Right, to establish that anchor we talked about.
Exactly. They establish that high anchor and then spend the rest of the year running so-called sales that really just reflect the actual everyday market value of the product.
Wait, are you saying there's no actual discount happening at all?
I'm saying the implied savings are a total fiction. The source material highlights a perfect example of this. So imagine a Roomba listed at $599, right? And it drops to $349 for the holiday.
Which sounds like a generational steal, honestly.
It does, but apply a modicum of scrutiny to it. If you run that URL through a price tracking tool, like Camel, 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 or the Honey extension, what you almost always discover is that the unit has been sitting at $349 or sometimes even lower for the past 6 months.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the headline discount mathematically exists between the fake MSRP and the current price, sure. But the savings aren't real. It's just a psychological lever pulled by retailers to create a false sense of urgency.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. Even if we assume the MSRP ceiling is sometimes manipulated by retail algorithms, you're completely ignoring the fact that the feature floor has genuinely dropped.
The feature floor?
Yeah, the baseline of what you get for your money. Let's look at what that $180 to $250 tier actually buys today compared to, say, 24 months ago. Just 2 years ago, that price bracket bought you a random bump-and-go model.
Ugh, the ones that just ping pong off the baseboards.
Exactly. They relied on basic infrared proximity sensors and physical bumpers that bounce around randomly, miss entire sections of the floor, and eventually, trap themselves under a couch.
Yeah, they were basically just expensive cat toys.
Right. But today, that exact same price tier buys you the LiDAR navigation I mentioned. It's not just a buzzword. It is a structural democratization of technology. The vacuum fires thousands of laser pulses a second to build a millimeter-accurate spatial map of your home.
Sure, the SLM algorithms.
Exactly. It's using SLAM algorithms to know precisely where it is in physical space, even in pitch darkness. The floor for what constitutes an entry-level machine has been raised so significantly, consumers are getting exponentially more processing power for the exact same dollar amount. That isn't retail theater. That is a massive market shift.
Okay, look, I'm not denying that laser navigation components have gotten cheaper to manufacture, but you're equating a component on a spec sheet with a successful consumer experience, and those are two very, very different things.
How so? I mean, if the hardware is better, the experience is naturally better, right?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Heavily discounted units are very frequently discounted for a reason. They fail in real-world application.
Fail how exactly?
Well, the source material points to rigorous testing methodologies, like those conducted by ZDNet. And those expose a consistent pattern. Spec sheets lie by omission.
Okay, I'm listening.
Let's talk about the physics of suction for a moment. A manufacturer will proudly slap a badge on the box during a Memorial Day sale advertising that a unit has like 4,000 pascals of raw suction power.
Which sounds like a lot.
Right, on paper, that looks like a high-end spec for a budget price. But raw suction numbers tell you absolutely nothing about the fluid dynamics inside the chassis.
Ah, you're talking about how the airway is sealed.
Yes, if the airway isn't perfectly sealed from the motor all the way down to the floor head, or, if the brush roll housing sits even 2 millimeters too high off the carpet, that 4,000 pascals just bleeds out into the ambient air.
Like losing tire pressure.
It's like trying to drink a thick milkshake with a cracked straw. You get zero lift at the actual floor level. A robot with a massive motor can still completely fail to pick up debris along baseboards because its edge-sweeping algorithms are poorly coded, or its internal airflow is just an aerodynamic disaster.
That makes sense.
So, navigation failures and brush roll tangling make a cheap vacuum a terrible purchase, no matter how inexpensive the upfront cost is. A markdown is completely illusory if the machine can't actually clean your floor.
Okay, I'll absolutely grant you that. Navigation intelligence and chassis design trump raw motor power every time. A machine can't clean a room if it can't navigate it. And, well, a cracked straw won't drink a milkshake.
Exactly.
And the independent testing you reference correctly identifies that high-end features like self-emptying base stations, where the robot automatically evacuates its own dustbin into a larger sealed bag, those are what truly separate frustrating gadgets from genuinely autonomous appliances.
Which those cheap models almost never have.
But let's apply that to the Memorial Day sales window. Look at the entry-level units from reputable brands like Eufy, Shark, and Roomba that are dropping to the $99 to $149 range.
Right, the ones without the self-emptying bases.
Yes, they aren't flagship models, but what they provide is a vital, low-risk entry point for first-time buyers. The concept of robot vacuum living actually requires a household adjustment.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you have to learn to clear cables, maybe move certain lightweight rugs, figure out if your dog is going to attack it, things like that. A $99 unit allows a consumer to test whether their home layout and daily habits are actually compatible with automated cleaning, and they can do that before they commit $800 to a massive ecosystem.
I see.
At that price, you're buying a reliable, warranted product from a known brand to handle just daily debris maintenance. Even without the perfect aerodynamic seal of a flagship, that is a highly rational purchase.
Well, it's only rational if you look strictly at the day of purchase. And that is exactly what these deal roundups want you to do. They hand the consumer a sale price, slap a percentage off badge next to it, and pretend the transaction is over.
But it's not?
No, we have to evaluate whether a low upfront price actually translates to a low total cost of ownership over time. The missing context in almost all this Memorial Day hype is the ongoing financial and technical burden placed on the buyer.
Oh, so you're pivoting to consumables now?
I am pointing out the razor and blades economic model that deal aggregators conveniently ignore. Let's look at the mandatory maintenance: replacement rubber brush rolls, spinning side brushes, high-efficiency HEPA filters. These aren't optional accessories. They are required to keep the machine functioning.
Well, yeah, any appliance needs maintenance.
Sure, but for those self-emptying models you praised, the proprietary dust bags are perpetual, ongoing cost. Across the major brands, replacing these consumables correctly will run a consumer $50 to $100 every single year.
Right.
So that vacuum that looks like an absolute steal at $200 during a flash sale quietly morphs into a $400 investment over a 2-year lifespan.
Okay, I don't dispute the math on consumables, but I fundamentally question your framing here. Does routine maintenance negate the inherent value of the initial hardware?
I think it radically changes the value proposition.
But we don't argue that a heavily discounted car is a bad deal simply because the owner will eventually have to pay for oil changes and new tires. The consumables are just a reality of the physical work the machine is doing. If a HEPA filter is clogged, it means the machine has successfully removed that particulate matter from your living environment.
That's true.
So that's not a hidden fee. That is literally the machine doing its job.
Fair enough. But a car doesn't suddenly forget how to steer just because the manufacturer decided to turn off a server.
Ah, the software longevity argument. I knew we'd get here.
It's the much larger liability here. Robot vacuums are entirely app-dependent devices. The hardware is basically useless without the digital infrastructure. Scheduling, specific room cleaning, no-go zones, crucial firmware updates, all of that runs through cloud servers maintained by the manufacturer.
Yes, that's how smart homes operate.
Right, but the source material highlights a highly disturbing trend. Brands are discontinuing app support for older models. We've seen this happen with Bissell, with older generations of iRobot machines, and with several EcoVacs models.
Which means when the manufacturer deprecates the app, the vacuum loses its core functionality.
When a company decides it's no longer financially viable to pay for the AWS servers handling a legacy vacuum's map data, they just pull the plug. It turns a smart device into a dumb, heavy paperweight.
Well, you can still press the clean button on the device.
Sure, it might still bump around if you physically push a button on top of it, but the mapped cleaning is entirely gone. And no Memorial Day deal write-up tells the consumer how long a brand has historically supported its software.
That is a fair concern regarding digital obsolescence, I'll admit. But it also brings up the protocol shifts happening right now, which actually makes newer, heavily discounted units more valuable.
You're referring to Matter, I assume.
Yes, exactly. Alexa and Google Home integration are baseline expectations now, but the industry is aggressively moving toward Matter. It's the cross-platform smart home standard intended to unify all these fragmented ecosystems. And the brilliance of Matter isn't just compatibility, it's local control.
Meaning it doesn't rely on the cloud.
Right. A Matter-enabled device operates on your local Thread network. It doesn't inherently need to phone home to a manufacturer's cloud server to know how to turn on.
But that actually proves my point. Many of the most heavily discounted units being pushed this Memorial Day are older inventory that lack Matter support.
Okay, that's true for some older stock.
And that places a hard ceiling on the longevity of the device. A unit discounted precisely because it predates the Matter standard is a product with a shrinking lifespan. It's heavily dependent on cloud servers that could just be shut off in 2 years. Total ownership cost, software longevity, and ecosystem fit, those are the metrics that actually matter, and they're entirely absent from the shiny sales pitch.
Okay, I'll push back on the idea that these factors render the sales completely illegitimate, though. Yes, an informed consumer absolutely has to account for consumables and software lifespans, but choosing a unit strategically during these sales fundamentally upgrades a household's cleaning routine in a way that provides immense return on investment.
Really, Give me an example where a discounted older model is still the better buy.
Sure. Let's take a buyer with 2 golden retrievers. If they purchase a unit specifically because it features tangle-resistant dual rubber extractors instead of traditional bristle brushes, they are solving a massive daily pain point.
Because of the pet hair.
Exactly. Think about how a bristle brush works mechanically. It literally weaves pet hair into a knot around the cylinder because of the friction. It requires constant manual cutting with a pair of scissors.
And rubber extractors don't do that.
No, they act like physical squeegees. They flex and counter-rotate to break up the hair and pass it straight up into the vacuum's throat before it even has a chance to wrap. Or consider a buyer with extensive sealed hardwood floors.
Okay, what about them?
If they take advantage of the Memorial Day drops to secure a combo vacuum mop with pressurized, downward force mopping pads, rather than just a passive, dragging wet cloth, they're receiving advanced engineering. Older passive mops were basically just damp swivers.
Right, they just wipe the floor.
Yeah, but new pressurized ones use high-frequency sonic scrubbing to physically break the bonds of dried liquids. So even with the ongoing cost of replacement mopping pads or filters, the initial discount allows them to access specialized hardware tailored to their specific environment. The time saved by not manually vacuuming pet hair carries immense economic and personal value.
I mean, I don't disagree that rubber extractors are mechanically superior for pet hair, but matching the hardware to the environment requires the consumer to sift through an absolute avalanche of misleading marketing to find that exact engineering.
It does take some research, yes.
The Memorial Day marketing blitz doesn't educate the consumer on the mechanical difference between bristles and extractors. It simply flashes a 50% off badge on a bristle brush model and hopes the consumer clicks buy before realizing they're purchasing a machine that will require daily manual untangling.
That is a fair critique of the marketing itself.
It's an information asymmetry problem. The retailer has all the data on why a machine is underperforming, lacking matter support, or built with outdated aerodynamics. The consumer only has the illusion of the discount.
Which is precisely why discourse like this, rooted in independent testing and analysis, is so necessary. The presence of marketing spin doesn't negate the presence of actual hardware advancements.
That's true.
The fact that LiDAR mapping, pressurized mopping systems, and advanced local navigation are now available at price points that were previously restricted to blind, random bouncing robots, that represents a real structural shift in the industry. It really is a democratization of autonomous robotics. Buyers simply have to be savvy about how they navigate the marketplace.
I suppose that's where our perspectives finally intersect. The burden of proof has entirely shifted to the consumer. If you're going to participate in these massive sales events, you have to treat the retailer's claims with intense skepticism.
Exactly. So, as we draw our discussion toward a close, let's summarize where we stand and where our frameworks align. I maintain that the structural shifts in the market, specifically the massive reductions in the cost of laser navigation, the aggressive price cuts on 2-in-1 combo units, and the availability of low-risk entry-level pricing from reputable brands, make these Memorial Day sales genuine opportunities.
Right.
The technology has improved, the manufacturing costs have decreased, and the consumer stands to benefit from that reality if they buy strategically.
And I maintain that without a rigorous evaluation of the total cost of ownership, the longevity of the software ecosystem, and of reliance on real-world physics over inflated spec sheets, consumers are simply participating in retail theater. A bad robot vacuum with a leaky chassis is a bad deal at any price, and high percentage discounts are too often used to mask outdated or poorly engineered machines.
Yet, despite our different framing of the market's intentions, I think we unequivocally agree on the framework a buyer must use to protect themselves.
We absolutely do. It requires a strict 3-step methodology. First, a buyer must verify the price history. You absolutely cannot rely on the retailer's crossed-out MSRP.
No, never.
Using tools like Camel to look at the 90-day stable pricing graph is just non-negotiable. If the price hasn't actually dropped from its historical baseline, the deal is an illusion.
Spot on. Second, buyers must rely on independent, long-term testing rather than single-day unboxing reviews. A machine's ability to maintain suction in its airway, its tendency to tangle over weeks of use, and the stability of its companion app, those are only revealed through lived experience.
Raw motor power numbers on a spec sheet are just not a substitute for behavioral testing in a physical environment.
Exactly. And third?
Third, the purchase has to be dictated by specific floor and pet needs, not just the steepest discount. Identifying whether your home requires those tangle-resistant rubber brushes for pet hair, high suction for thick pile carpet, or pressurized mopping for hard floors ensures the machine actually serves its intended purpose.
Right.
If a machine survives all three of those filters, then, and really only then, is the transaction justified.
It's all about dissecting the marketing claims to find the mechanical and economic truth underneath. We won't declare a definitive winner today, because the reality of the market requires navigating both the technological breakthroughs I highlighted and the hidden ownership costs you illuminated.
There is definitely a wealth of nuance in the source material for those looking to apply this specific three-step framework to their own evaluations.
It always comes down to doing the reading, doesn't it?
Always.
Indeed. Which brings us back to where we started. When you see that crossed-out price tag and the anchoring effect kicks in, just take a step back. Ask yourself, are you buying a genuine upgrade for your home's ecosystem, or are you just buying the mirage of a discount?